Um, I'm really happy to welcome you back again, Christina, to talk to us as part of the Art and Scent series. Dr. Christina Bradstreet is our guest curator at the Watts Gallery at the moment for Scented Visions and also author of the book. And we're looking forward to hearing your talk today on fragrance and feeling in Victorian painting. So everyone, thanks for coming along to hear this. And as with other weeks, you're very welcome to put your questions into the Q&A area. And then at the end, we can ask some of those and talk them through with Christina at the end of the talk. So thanks. I'll hand over to you.
Hey, thanks, Charlie, and thank you everyone for coming today. Yeah, so as Charlie said, my talk today is about scent and nature, so kind of natural scents and how they have influence mood and meaning, create feeling and ideas in Victorian paintings. So the sense of nature run through Victorian art and this kind of scented visions that I look at in the exhibition. So they run through these paintings, through my book. There you go, Scented Visions, and through the exhibition that's now on at Watts Gallery until November the 9th. Rather like this ribbon of smoky violet paint that swirls and sweeps through Evelyn de Morgan's The Cadence of Autumn, evoking the scent of autumn leaves swept up and swirling in the breeze. These scents of nature, fragrances and aromas create a thread that run through scented visions, or that's the term I give to Victorian paintings that convey scent. Just to point out at this stage, I'm going to be talking about some paintings that are in the exhibition, and some paintings that I wish were in the exhibition, but for one reason or another, we weren't able to get. So where they are in the exhibition, I've put an SV there to stand for Scented Visions, just so I don't have to keep saying that it is or isn't in the exhibition. Last time, if you were here, I spoke about What's This Choosing, and the image of a girl, the actress Ellen Terry, choosing between the scentless camellias and the sweet scented violets that she holds in the palm of her hands, as a metaphor for her choice between her showy, superficial life on the stage and the more humble, but in Watts's eyes, good life as Watts's wife and me's. The scents can come into Victorian painting in many, many ways, whether it's Rossetti's Venus Verticordia, in which a bare-breasted Venus with luscious red lips and cascades of auburn hair is showed embowered in a profusion of full-blown roses and honeysuckles, the sheer density and opulence of which brings to mind a kind of strong floral scent. The reds and pinks give a warm intensity to the painting, and these Venetian or Titian, Veronese inspired tones give a feeling of visual excess, and this excess seems to spill over into the other senses, as if threatening to engulf us in a cloying perfume. Fluttering above, we see Venus as a symbol, as a bluebird, as a reference to the ancient classics. And the idea that bluebirds only lived for a single day. So there's a kind of reminder there that life and love, like beauty and like the ephemeral roses and their scent, are fleeting. But this intensity, this beauty, is not really natural, though. This goddess of love with her apple, which refers to the beauty contest judged by Paris, is an Eve-like temptress. Rossetti's friend, the art critic F.G. Stevens, described her as a winner of hearts, and there's more evil than good in her. The curling tongues of the honeysuckle are almost like fragrance trails, luring, even sucking us in, sucking the viewer in like an insect. They were even described by the famous feminist art historian Griselda Pollock as evocative of female genitalia. See how the butterflies are drawn to Venus's halo. So they're drawn to the halo, the spear, the arrow, and also the apple. So they're not actually drawn to the flowers. It's as if Venus's own scent is more intense, more seductive than even the flowers that envelop her. And certainly the scent that's being suggested here is more intense, more cloying than the kind of light, simple floral toilet waters like eau de violet, eau de lavender, that etiquette favoured for English ladies in the 1860s. So scent, as I say, runs as a kind of thread through these paintings, whether it's Burne-Jones's The Briar Rose series, which tells the story of Sleeping Beauty, or part of that story. And so here the knight is discovering the sleeping soldiers who've become completely entwined in a thicket of briar roses. And sleep and scent were conflated in the poem that William Morris wrote to accompany this first painting in the series. And the presence of sleep in the scenes takes the form of a kind of unifying fragrance trail. The fateful slumber floats and flowers about the tangle of the rose. Sometimes an image of a natural scent is not as simple as it first seems. Sorry, that it's cut off at the top. It says Helen Thornycroft. So if we look at Helen Thornycroft's Narcissus from 1876, oh, sorry for the typo there. This is a painting we would love to have had in the show, but it's in a private collection and just don't quite know where it is. So if anyone knows, I'd love to hear from you. But yeah, so here we have Narcissus, the vain youth wallowing in a meadow, his nostrils flared as he enjoys his namesake flower. I think it's likely that the olfactory indulgence here signals homoerotic pleasure. Helen Thornycroft was the sister of the sculptor William Hamow Thornycroft, and friends with his lover, the writer and critic Edmund Gosse. Gosse and Thornycroft were olfactifs. That is to say, they belonged to a kind of class of urban sophisticates, dandies, bohemians, male aesthetes and decadents, who were keenly interested in scent and enjoyed deploying and using perfume in different ways. And I think that Helen has created this painting for that kind of circle who would have really enjoyed this painting. And sometimes scent is suggested in rather unnatural circumstances and for unnatural purposes, such as the deluge of rose petals in Alma Tadema's The Roses of Heliogabalus from 1888, in which we see the banquet of the Syrian-born emperor. Here he is. He self-styled himself as the high priest of the sun god. And he held this banquet, smothering his guests with an avalanche of flowers dropped from a reversible ceiling. You can see this kind of sail that's been taken down. Entertained from his couch, the reclining emperor is watching over, taking pleasure in deluging his guests and watching them struggle and flounder. Some critics read the figures as gasping for breath under the overwhelming scent of the roses. The Archdeacon of Westminster, who was particularly conservative in his reviews of contemporary art in general, in 1888, he described this as a carnival of bejeweled sensualism, portent of abysmal depravity. Another critic, who we just know as Penelope, writing for Exeter's Western Times, spoke of visiting Alma Tadema's studio and being told, no, they're not dead at all, they're not dying, just only luxuriating. Either way, at any rate, there's a strange kind of unsettling tension between the beauty of the roses, the women, the exquisite marble, the azure sky, everything so beautiful, with this kind of threat of smothering and asphyxiation. So already, just in these few paintings, we've seen the sense of nature being used to evoke a whole range of ideas and feelings. from the loyal and faithful bride to the erotic temptress, to the olfactif, to scent intoxicating, sending sending courtiers to sleep for 100 years, as in the Briar Rose series, or even as in Alma Tadema's painting, perhaps even suffocating the guests altogether. So these are three themes that I wanted to but there are three themes in particular that I wanted to focus on for the rest of my talk. And these are memory and the scent of autumn leaves in Millet's Autumn Leaves, spirituality in the scent of meadows and rainbows. So I'll explain the scent of the rainbow in a little bit in relation to Millet's The Blind Girl, and the erotic and the scent of roses in relation to Waterhouse's The Soul of the Rose. And we'll see that these themes actually interconnect throughout. I think it's important to talk about scent and memory. Whenever I tell people about my research, they always tell me about that phenomena of a scent taking us back instantly and powerfully, very often to our childhood. So for me, it's the smell of Daz laundry powder. It makes me think of my nan. Or that synthetic smell of strawberries makes me think of a scented pencil that I had as a child. I'm sure you know that experience, which can be incredibly intense and emotional, or it can be a sort of half memory, like a haunting, where you can't quite reach at that memory that's being tugged at. But that too is an intense and poignant experience. In Victorian art, it usually seems to be specifically the scent of decaying organic matter that's linked to memory. And I think that goes back to the miasma theory, the idea that disease is caused by rotting, the smell of rotting matter floating in the air, that we breathe that in, but that it could not only cause disease like cholera, but also affect our kind of our mood, our spirits. So in Millet's Autumn Leaves, the rotting autumn leaves creating this kind of slightly sort of nostalgic sort of sense of kind of grieving for something lost, childhood lost, perhaps. Just a kind of a slightly sort of depressing sort of feel to it. As Alfred Lord Tennyson put it in his poem, "A spirit haunts the year's last hours" of 1830. He wrote, "My very heart faints and my whole soul grieves at the moist, rich smell of the autumn leaves," which I think kind of captures the mood of this painting very nicely. And for the pre-Raphaelite painter Millet, this painting may well have started, in fact, with an experience he had while staying with Tennyson at Tennyson's home in Freshwater on the Isle of Wight. According to a diary entry by Tennyson's wife, Emily, in November 1854, Millet was beguiled into sweeping up leaves and burning them. So perhaps this was inspiration for this painting of four girls tending to a bonfire. And we see a bluish kind of smoke, which one critic described as oozing and straining through the half-withered leaves. Oozing and straining made me think of the tea bag or tea leaves, and this kind of scent of coming up through as the water diffuses through the leaves. So Millet painted this on his return from honeymoon in the autumn of 1855 at his new home Annet Lodge in Perthshire, Scotland, where he'd spent the first 2 years of his married life with Effie, who you'll know was previously married to Ruskin. It's a very wistful painting. There's a nostalgia that comes with autumn, the sense of the dying day, as the nights start closing in early, the end of the year approaching. A dusky twilight closes over the deep blue of the distant hills, tinged with the fading embers of the setting sun. The painting captures chill autumn air on ruddy faces, the rustle of wind through half-bare trees, and a desolate garden beneath a solemn grey sky. We might think of it as a lamentation of the passing of summer and of the transience of youth and beauty. The doleful expression of the girls in their somber tone dresses enhances this pensive mood. Millet was just married, as I said, but in pensive mood. His close friend, the artist Walter Deverell, who I think you would have all heard of. I'm sure if only he'd lived longer. He died in February 1854. Effie was pregnant with their first child. So Millet had much to reflect on. And the nation was in the grip of despair and grief and disillusionment following the Crimean War, which Millet responded to directly in several paintings. Perthshire, Millet's home, was home to the 42nd Highland Regiments, which suffered significant losses at the Battle of Balaclava on October the 25th, 1854. 39 of the regiment were killed, and 227 went on to die from wounds and diseases incurred in that combat. So we can think about this painting as a response to the nation's mourning, a kind of modern vanitas painting, a reminder that life is ephemeral, the smoke symbolizing the ephemeral nature of life, the fallen leaves, the stages of life, and our immortality. Autumn Leaves evokes a sense of reverential stillness. There's no narrative, no story being told here, and rather we are led by the girl's reverie. It's a painting about the inward gaze. In a letter to F.G. Stevens, Millet stated his intention that the painting awakened by its solemnity the deepest religious reflection. I chose the subject of burning leaves as most calculated to produce this feeling. Millet's fellow pre-Raphaelite painter Holman Hunt also read the painting this way. In his autobiographical history of the pre-Raphaelite movement, published in 1905, he claims to remember Millet saying way back in 1851, "Is there any sensation more delicious than has been awakened by the odor of burning leaves? To me, nothing brings back sweeter memories of the days that are gone. It is the incense offered by departing summer to the sky, and it brings one a happy conviction that time puts a peaceful seal on all that has gone." And I do think that the autumnal haze creates a kind of mysteriousness, like an image from memory, the imagination, or a dream. The glowing sunset gives the girls an almost supernatural aura, and the rising smoke hovers like a ghost in the air. The two dark-haired sisters dressed in mourning look out at the painting as if into the past, almost as if guiding the viewer into their own thoughts and memories. In that autumn of 1855, Millet was working on a second painting, a painting that in contrast speaks of spring, I think, and which features two of the same models, in fact. Both paintings evoke mood and meaning through references to the senses and smell in particular, although that may not be immediately obvious with this painting, but I'll come on to explain how. But while Autumn Leaves served as a reminder of the brevity of life, the blind girl invites viewers to take grateful pleasure in life and its natural pleasures, and to be present to the world around us and to the Lord. The Blind Girl is a painting about sight, blindness, and spiritual vision. We see a blind girl and a younger, able-sighted sister or child resting by a wayside. The focal point of the painting is the blind girl's face, with her brilliant red lips and closed eyes lit up by the sunlight. We sense from her quiet stillness a heightened alertness to the scents and sounds of the meadow, as well as a rapt attention to spiritual inward gaze. In contrast, the younger girl is twisted around and appears to gaze up and beyond, across to the double rainbow arching across the sky, while nestling back into her sister for refuge, as if amazed by and apprehensive of this sublime spectacle. So we feel the contrast between the blind girl and her able-sighted sister, and indeed between the blind girl and us, the viewer of the painting. We are called to admire the minute observation of nature, although in fact Millet was moving away from his very, very precise pre-Raphaelite stage. We are called to admire the jewel-like radiance of the painting. So one critic in 1856, when it was exhibited at the Royal Academy, described the sweetmeat rainbow of lollipop colours. Half a century later, Millet's son wrote that sunlight seems to issue through the painting or from the painting. And I completely agree with that. We appreciate Millet's skill and are acutely conscious of the blind girl's lack of sight, while thinking of the blind girl who we imagine as meditating on the sounds and smells of the pasture, which are really beyond the limits of the painter of Millet to convey. So I think the limits of paint may well have been on Millet's mind when he was painting this. While staying in Winchelsea in Sussex, where the scene was painted, he and his very good friend Thackeray, the novelist, went to a church. In fact, I think it was this church here, the Church of St. Thomas, and on the horizon line there, where the vicar was giving a sermon on the superiority of God's work over man's. Leaning over the pulpit with arms outstretched and eyes fixed on Millet, he cried out repeatedly, "Can you paint this? Can you paint that? Can you paint that?" Before closing, "No, my brethren, he cannot paint that," until the two friends were hysterical in trying to suppress their laughter. The painting is often said to be about the senses, touch, scent, flowers, and country air, sounds, the rooks cawing, donkeys braying, the concertina on her lap, although that's unplayed, touch because she's holding a harebell, very gently, the stem of the harebell between her two fingers, and you can think about the dampness of the earth beneath them as well. Along the horizon line, we're looking at the outskirts of Winchelsea, and at the centre of the Rainbow's End, the early 14th century Strand Gate, part of the medieval town wall. This links to the old metaphor of the mines as a medieval fortified city, which was rehearsed in a number of Victorian physiology texts. In one, for example, the senses are described as the sentinels, which guard us against the approach of danger. In another, as the outlets by means of which the mind goes out into the external world, and the inlets by which the elements of the external world enter and impress the soul. So we might think of the Strand Gate there as not only the boundary between town and country, but as the symbol of the blind girl's remaining senses, the gates between her inner self and the landscape she inhabits. The goodness that she radiates is the beauty of God's pasture streaming into her, shaping her thoughts and emotions, her attention in turn focusing the viewer's awareness upon God's creation as presented by the artist. In the painting, the nature is depicted as bountiful. The grass is lush, and on the bank a few harebells flower. Yet Millet also suggests an element of harshness in nature. Despite this lushness, the ground is damp and muddy where the girls sit. In the pasture, rooks scavenge, and cows and donkeys, beasts of burden, graze. The rainbow shines against a dark storm cloud, so there is both the radiant and the bleak here. The blind girl with her glowing skin and glossy hair appears to radiate health and goodness, despite her tatty, linsey, woolsey clothes and rough-knuckled hands. We can imagine that the girls are en route to earn a few pennies with the concertina. Meanwhile, in the fields, the rooks scavenge for worms or an echo of their toil. A single heart's ease flower peeks through the grass, providing meagre comfort. In the painting, the red-haired blind girl, in painting the red-haired blind girl, Billow was likely thinking of victims of the Irish potato famine of 1848, during which epidemic ophthalmia was rife and 1 million Irish emigrated. Certainly, the painting responds to the Poor Law Amendment Act of 1834, which made no provision for vagrants, meaning that workhouses were only obliged to offer relief to those with legal settlement in the catchment area. By 1837, workhouses did have casual wards for urgent cases, usually one night's shelter in return for labour, but conditions were harsher than on the main wards. An outcome of the act was a dramatic rise in the number of blind children put into care of institutions for the blind. So in venturing into Winchelsea to try their luck with a concertina, they risk separation or arrest for begging or sleeping rough, in accordance with the 1824 Vagrancy Act. This is the law that made sleeping rough illegal. It's a law that's still in place today, although is due. The government has promised that they will finally repeal it next year. With her nose pressed against the folds of the blind girl's head shawl, the younger girl is shown experiencing at once the extraordinary vision of the rainbow and the ordinary, even comforting smell of the old worn fabric. The disparity between the sublime illusion of the distant ephemeral rainbow and the tangible the tangible proximity of the shore which she holds near her face makes this gap between the promise of heaven and the realities of everyday hardship all the more poignant. The 19th century saw a huge rise in charitable support for the blind. Between 1799 and 1899, the number of institutions and societies for the blind rose in Victorian Britain from 4 to 154. So Millais' painting is playing to growing sentimentality and pity for the blind. He's depicted her in a simple headdress in a pyramid composition, so she's strongly reminiscent of the Virgin Mary. While many Christians regarded the death as immoral because of their ignorance of the word of the Lord, so it was said, this trope of the poor, grateful Christian blind girl blessed with spiritual insight increased in popularity. So you could think of Little Nell in Charles Dickens' Old Curiosity Shop. She's kind of the exemplar of this stock type. When I was researching this painting, actually when I was doing my PhD years ago, I had a kind of eureka moment in the British Library where I literally jumped out of my chair because I found a poem called The Blind Girl. It's from 1845 by a Cambridge-educated banker, writer and poet Robert Snow. The poem goes, or it begins, here... Sister, I have oft suspected to idle grief thou dost incline. Now by the throb thou art detected of thy fingers pressed to mine. Declaring herself full of gratitude for her remaining senses, she explains, I a stranger am to weeping, evermore awake or sleeping, flows the current of my joy. Rejoicing in the rich sensorial experience of God's bounty, it is, she says, by the sense sublime of smelling, I know the fields the Lord have blessed. The poignancy of the painting comes from the viewer's understanding that the beauty of the natural world, the burst of intense sunlight that follows a storm, is a sight denied to the blind girl. The art critic J. Pythian in 1911 described how there rushes upon us a sense of the great disinheritance of the blind, and inevitably with our sorrow for them comes a joyous recognition of all that sight means to us. The blind girl is wearing a label, just here, that says pity the blind. Here, however, the letters are shaded with just the D lit up by the sun. as if a little light filters through to her blue eyes, which are just visible beneath her lashes. Yet Millet creates a sense of pathos, not only by urging our pity for the girl and our gratitude for our own senses, but also through recognizing that the blind girl does not see herself as dispossessed, but as rich with the blessings of the Lord. She enjoys, for example, concertina music, bird song, meadow scents, and the warmth of the sun. Snow's poem concludes with the couplet, "For God, who made, O kind, beauty for one and all, gave fragrance for the blind." In both painting and poem, far from pitying the blind girl, we're invited to commend her serenity. In Snow's poem, it's the sister who weeps, and the blind girl who says, "Sister, I make no vain pretences, weighing thus my gifts with thine. For I have, as thou hast, senses to comprehend that word to shine." Indeed, she says, "A day shall dawn, a day of brightness, when we alike in robes of whiteness shall see our Maker face to face." Unfortunately, we have no way of knowing really if Millet knew Snow's poem. Although he might have read the book it was published in, Snow's Memorials of the Tour on the Continent and Other Miscellaneous Poems from 1845, which could have appealed to him. It had an essay on art and imitation in it. Also, Millet was talking at that time about wanting to tour the continent. Or he might have read the poem in Notes and Queries. So Notes and Queries was a Victorian journal, a bit like an internet forum today. So people would send in a question or a thought, and then people would write in the following issues with their responses to it. And I found this chain called The Odour of the Rainbow, in which Snow's poem is quoted. But also in that same edition of Notes and Queries, you have lots on Thackeray's novel, The Newcomes, which Millet was hooked upon that summer and autumn of 1855 when he was staying in Winchelsea. So yeah, we don't know that he'd read it, but it's possible. So I was explaining about this chain of called The Odour of the Rainbow in Notes and Queries. Over several issues, readers exchanged literary references to the scent of wet earth, grass, and flowers when the sun comes out after a rainstorm and a rainbow is to be seen. The aroma you might know as petrichor. The passage cited reads, "Once on the rainbow while I was resting to hear the raindrops in their mirth, you said you saw the rainbow cresting at the heavens with colours based on earth. And I believe it fills the showers with music. And when sweeter air than common breathes from briar rose bowers, I think the rainbow has touched there." Other citations about the odour of the rainbow come from a range of sources, including Table Talk from 1835 by Samuel Coleridge, William Brown's Britannia Pastorals of 1613, and Francis Bacon's Silva Silvarium of 1651, in which the sweet dew of the rainbow is described as having the scent of herbs and flowers as of distilled water. The art critic and champion of the pre-Raphaelites, John Ruskin, broached the subject of scent and spectacle in The Blind Girl when he reviewed the painting in 1856, when it was at the Royal Academy Summer Exhibition. It was a very generous reading of the painting, considering that Millet had only recently gone off with and married his former wife. Ruskin observes that the sun has but this moment come out after a shower, and the smell of the grass is pleasant. An intensely bright double rainbow was relieved against the departing thunder cloud. So it's interesting that when Ruskin looks at this painting, he smells the smell of the grass. For viewers of the painting, rainbows held deep Christian significance. As a reminder of divine covenant and the promise of redemption, the rainbow suggests the better world to come for the blind girl and for all believers. By the 19th century, the rainbow was also a symbol of Christ. For example, a Presbyterian minister in North Carolina wrote a passage in the American journal Hours at Home, saying, "Christ is the token of a tempest ended, a darkness past, even as the bow only comes forth when the rain is over and gone. The sun of righteousness beams out sweetly and clearly in the soul's purified air and gilds the clouds of sorrow and sin. The heart is all fresh and fragrant with new spiritual life, as when the grass and trees sparkle with drops left by a departed shower. Peace and stillness reign, and wide and high in the soul's sky is reared the jeweled arch of hope. Millet's radiant pastoral scene might then be considered a scene of redemption and as an allegorical sacramental landscape in which communion is achieved through sensorial, indeed synesthetic appreciation of the natural world. If the colours of the rainbow signal God's promise, so did scent, and if scent offered a bridge between earth and heaven, the rainbow gave that bridge a visible sign. So finally, I wanted to look at William Waterhouse's The Soul of the Rose. This is a painting, like Millet's Autumn Leaves, that I dearly would have loved to have in the exhibition. Autumn Leaves was too fragile to travel. The Soul of the Rose, I'm told, could be wrong, but I'm told it rarely leaves a vault in somewhere in New York. So the Soul of the Rose can be read as an aesthetic response to the erotic olfactory imagination. In this painting, an auburn-haired beauty is depicted leaning against a garden wall and drinking in the scent of a Turkish damask rose, which she presses to her face. Her thick, elongated pre-Raphaelite neck is extended, stretched out to reach the flower, and every muscle of her body is strained to the act of smelling. She tilts the flower towards herself, and her lips caress its petals with tender passion, suggesting a fusion of olfactory and gustatory pleasure. However, the conjunction of nose and petal provides the compositional focus, making the painting primarily about the act of smelling and the effect of odour upon body and mind. By collapsing the space between the petals and the sweeping profile of her long aquiline nose, the direct passage of the inhaled scent into her female body is visually suggested. The figure's eyes are closed, suggesting total concentration upon this one sensory impression, and her left hand clutches the wall as if for support, as the heady perfume makes its intoxicating effect. Waterhouse's painting presents a fascinating depiction of a woman in the throes of a passionate, scented vision, which is visually implied but not directly rendered. It reflects a contemporary awareness of the poignancy for smell, for raising sentimental visions and emotional memories. In this context, one can suppose that the scent has stimulated her desire, perhaps raising before her closed eyes the image of a lover. The rose-covered wall then becomes the space onto which her scent-fueled imagination projects their form. Her pose supports this reading, inviting the speculation, and while clutching the garden wall, she imagines leaning upon him or her, a palm flat against their chest. We might infer that the bloom pressed so sensuously against her mouth has, in her mind, taken on the lips of her lover. Certainly, the power of rose scent to arouse the image of a loved one was well known. As early as 1868, a writer on the census for the popular penny-illustrated paper had mused, "Who cannot recall mingling with the perfume of some favourite flower the still more subtle scent of those glossy tresses, the delicate touch of that dainty hand as it held the bloom? Alone with a rose for 15 seconds, a man might be a fool to his senses, and with his arm in imagination round some slim rounded waist, his eyes looking for a miniature of himself in those mirrors that look back at him, his eyes waiting for a whispered word, his lips, well, never mind." The painting calls to mind a passage in the romance The Life Everlasting of 1911 by the novelist Marie Corelli, who was a vocal opponent of women's suffrage. In it, a red rose, like a rescuing knight, clambers up the turret in which the heroine is imprisoned to reach her as she looks out of her lofty window, its opening petals lifting towards her like sweet lips turned up for kisses. Arguably, Waterhouse invites his male viewer to imagine the woman's lover as female. The rose metaphor, as in Turgenev's Fathers and Sons, evoking titillating thoughts of a lesbian embrace, with the male viewer looking on, imagining himself smelling the woman as she smells a rose. Either way, Waterhouse's painting suggests a vision, a memory, or sexual fantasy inspired by the scent of the rose. In The Soul of the Rose, we can also read the rose bush and wall as a reflection of the female figure, since clear comparisons are drawn between rose and woman, which are pressed together like a mirror image. Her cheeks are suffused with a warm roseate flush, which ricochets from the bloom pressed against her face, while her patterned green Turkish-style robe seems to replicate the tones and undulating forms of the Turkish rosebush, which dresses the body of the wall. In this way, her amorousness might even be read as self-directed, hence the act of smelling rose flowers could be understood as an autoerotic act, particularly when one considers the rose vagina metaphor and the painting's alternative title of My Sweet Rose. Indeed, if we interpret the act of touching and smelling the rose while fantasizing about a lover as having a masturbatory overtone, the implications of perversity are heightened by the Victorian Edwardian suggestion of self-harming as the woman presses her fawn against the thorny stem of the rosebush. In any case, scent is undoubtedly posited as an erotic entity and a sexual stimulus, suggestive of polymorphous pleasures. Indeed, while images of smelling roses within an enclosed garden space reinforce the traditional constraints of female domesticity, the insinuation of a solitary woman attending to her own sexual desires might equally be suggestive and supportive of the contemporary challenges to prevailing attitudes to sexual relations made by the new women and her male supporters. Given the painting's title and its allusion to a line from Tennyson's Maud, and the soul of the rose went into my blood, Waterhouse's painting would seem to reflect both popular and scientific interest in the bodily effects of scent, as well as the affinity of smell with memory and mood. The poem Maud describes the musings of a man lamenting lost opportunities to win the woman he loves. As he pines in a rose garden, woodbine spices are wafted abroad, and the musk of the rose is blown. Waterhouse's painting also expresses the sense of yearning. In it, the female figure is flushed and her expression is pensive, as if the fragrance has summoned a memory that brings both pain and pleasure. By matching the hue of the figure's flushed physicality to that of the rose against her cheek, the idea of pleasure aroused and even consummated through the act of smelling is visually conveyed. This connection between the soul or scent of the rose and the stimulatory action of odour upon the bloodstream and heart rate is made explicit in Corelli's The Life Everlasting, as the heroine bends her face over the rose against her breast to inhale its delicious, soft and penetrating scent, and half-consciously kisses its velvet petals. And so for a while we made silent friends with each other, till I might have said with the poet, the soul of the rose went into my blood. At any rate, something keen, fine and subtle stole over my senses, moving me to an intense delight in merely being alive. I forgot everything except that I lived, and life was ecstasy. In Corelli's literature and Waterhouse's art, scent is a drug with an intensely erotic charge. From the 1880s to the early 1900s, there was considerable physiological interest in the effects of odour stimulation and tranquilization, both sexual and non-sexual. In his Essays on Health Culture, translated in 1887, the German physician and hygienist Jaeger wrote of his experiments measuring the impact of different scents upon the nervous system, using what he called a chronometer. Light, fresh and wholesome floral scents, he argued, have a stimulating effect upon the body and mind, while health and oppressive odours made the heartbeat beat sluggish, causing lethargy. The Soul of the Rose echoes sentiments expressed by sexologists in the period about the properties of odour and colour as an aphrodisiac. Havelock Ellis broached the 19th century tradition of associating female sexuality with floral scent in Sexual Selection in Man. He argued that it is really the case that in many persons, usually if not exclusively women, The odour of flowers produces not only a highly pleasurable, but distinctly and specifically sexual effect. Citing the case of a lady living in India for whom roses had little effect and who was only aroused by the more penetrating, heavier scents of lilies, tuberose, and gardenia, he inferred that while sensitive English women might be aroused by delicate scents, Eastern women or Western women acclimatized to Eastern living required more potent olfactory stimuli. In 1905, the German sexologist Bloch noted the awakening of libido sexualis in women by the smelling of a bouquet of flowers. He quotes The Psychology of Love from 1875 by the Italian physiologist and pioneer of sexual medicine, Paolo Montegarza, to demonstrate the effect of scent simulation upon sensitive women and the resemblance between the facial expressions of a woman when smelling a flower and when experiencing orgasm. Make the chastest woman smell the flowers she likes best, and she will shut her eyes, breathe deeply, and if very sensitive, tremble all over, presenting an intimate picture which otherwise she never shows, except perhaps to her lover. This notion of women's susceptibility to the erotics of scent surely goes a long way toward accounting for the popularity of floral-scented visions in the art of this period. They are intimate pictures worked with the viewer cast in the role of the imagined lover, smelling the woman in the act of smelling. While enjoyed by the chastest women, solitary inhalation was imagined to have clear, aberrant overtones. Bloch cites a woman who claimed, "I sometimes feel such pleasure in smelling flowers that I seem to be committing a sin." By the 1900s, ideas about the sin of scent arousal and its effects on women had been circulated for decades. As early as 1851, an article in the Journal of Psychological Medicine and Mental Pathology described the effects of women's body odours upon heterosexual men as a necessary and healthy part of the reproductive process. Floral scents, however, were a luxury for women that in some constitutions cannot be indulged without some danger to the morals by the excitement of the ovaria which results. And though less potent as aphrodisiacs in their action on the sexual system of women than of men, we have reason to think they cannot be used to excess with impunity by most. So while heterosexual males were thought to be attracted to female body odours and women's perfumes, prompting arousal, copulation, and the propagation of the human race, some women were thought to have a strong sexual attraction to floral fragrance, here described in masturbatory rather than reproductive terms. This displaced female sexual attraction from the odour of men to the scent of flowers held an erotic appeal due to its suggestion of something intimate and contrary to the natural order, from which men were excluded, but could nevertheless watch or imagine. Such ideas held roots in the mid-Victorian period. One is reminded of the veracity with which Ellen Terry smells the camellia in Choosing, a painting that Waterhouse surely knew and held in mind since it was shown at the G.F. Watts retrospective held at the Royal Academy in 1905. One might also think of the conservatory scene in George Eliot's The Mill on the Floss from 1860, 4 years prior to Watts's painting. In the novel, Stephen and Maggie's passion reaches such a rapturous intensity that Maggie, conscious of Stephen's gaze and her own turbulent emotions, rejects his advances, repressing her feelings out of respect for her childhood sweetheart Philip and her cousin Lucy. She blushed deeply, turned away her head, and drew her arm from Stephen's, going up to some flowers to smell them. "Oh, may I get this rose?" said Maggie. "I think I am quite wicked with roses. I like to gather them and smell them till they have no scent left." As Stephen showers Maggie's arms with kisses, the rose becomes a distraction upon which he lavishes her displaced passions, until quivering with rage and humiliation, she orders him to leave. By spurning Stephen and devouring the scent of the rose instead, Maggie rejects productive sexual activity, in contrast to Fenishka in Fathers and Sons, who is sexually compromised when she allows herself to be kissed as she smells the rose. In a quivering rage, Maggie is shown to be in a near hysterical state. The scent that she breathes so deeply excites rather than calms her nerves, leaving her trembling and panting. It's as if by experiencing the frustrations of sexual continence, Maggie is left susceptible to the arousing potential of scent. in a scene in which Maggie is quite wicked with roses. Smell as the basis sense serves as the sign and agent of her sexuality and of its illicit nature. Nevertheless, Waterhouse's The Soul of the Rose explores themes of erotic sensuality and earthly pleasure. The historical association with spirituality and the soul also underpins this work. No sense is more closely connected with the sphere of the soul than the sense of smell. That's a quote from Reverend Macmillan in 1871 in his book, The Ministry of Nature. And this nexus between sense and soul, so eloquently described by Macmillan, was powerfully evoked in Waterhouse's The Soul of the Rose. The female figure can be seen as the visual embodiment of the flower's scent soul, her inner purity symbolized by her beauty and the pearls in her hair. The conflation of sense, sexuality, and soul in these works is best understood through the idea of floral scents as offering, in Macmillan's words, an important means of communication with heaven and a direct avenue for the soul's approach to the Father of Spirits. Just as Saint Teresa of Avila was transfixed by the angel's dart of divine love, the rapture of the female protagonist in The Soul of the Rose might be read as being due to the penetration of the scent or divine soul of the rose as it's inhaled into the body. In Waterhouse's paintings, erotic excitement and spiritual ecstasy are aligned, and the transgressive nature of 19th century sexuality finds transcendence through the imagery of women smelling flowers and breathing floral scented air. For the art writer Rose Sketchley, the spiritual was key to Waterhouse's work. In her survey of Waterhouse's oeuvre for the Art Journal, an assessment so insightful that it seems very likely that she had talked very closely with the artist about his work. She observes of another painting, which I should show you, but it's in the show, Waterhouse's The Shrine. She says, in its poetry of fair colour, form and arrangement, art such as this has a ministry that reaches beyond sense, enabling the attainment of a final fulfillment beyond, say rather through, the visible ends of the world. So you can see that nature, as I said, runs through many Victorian-centred visions, suggesting everything from memory and grief and nostalgia and childhood innocence to the spiritual and gratitude for and God's presence, to scent as erotic and arousing, but also as a kind of a link to the soul and to heaven, and in many other ways besides. So I'll leave it there and see if you have any questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Christina. Just opening up the question area to see if anybody's got any questions at all. Perhaps whilst we're waiting, I was so taken by one of the particular paintings and just wondered if you maybe could tell us a little bit more about it. It was the Alma Tadma one, the roses of is it the roses of Heliogabalus?
Yeah. Sure, I'll put it back up.
Such a beautiful painting. I'm so interested in that one.
I'll just find it for you.
Okay. Incredible.
Yeah, so this so as I said, Heliogabalus was a Roman born Syrian emperor. He called himself the sun god. He was notorious for having lovers of both sexes. Although we don't have this painting in the exhibition, we do have a painting by Simeon Solomon of Heliogabalus holding an incense burner in a kind of temple space. So he is known for kind of loving perfumes and scented spaces, rather like the. So I think he appealed to the Victorian stock type of the olfactif, this kind of bohemian, often gay man who really sort of enjoyed perfume. So yes, so the figure of Heliogabalus really sort of appeals in this Victorian period. And Alma Tadema has painted a scene from this banquet that he supposedly held, in which this all these rose petals. In the text, it also says violet petals, although Alma Tadema was just chosen to focus on the roses, where he has them dropped from this fake ceiling onto the guests below.
They almost look like butterflies, don't they?
Butterflies.
Yeah, some of them.
The figures.
The rose petals.
The rose petals, yeah. And it creates this kind of almost like a perfume trail, as if so you can imagine the kind of scent of the painting coming out of the painting into our space. There are I can't think of the names right now, it's in my book, but there are sort of at least a couple of Renaissance paintings that have fragrance trails of petals in them. So I think Alma Tadema is kind of harking back to a way in which you can suggest scent in paintings, but by having the petals kind of flung up through the air, it does, and the petals being in the air creates that sort of suggestion of scent there. The figures sort of almost look like they're swimming, like this lady at the front here sort of doing almost as if she's doing breath crawl. They don't really look to me like they're dying, more like as he's supposedly told Penelope, they look more like they're luxuriating. So it's interesting that so many of the critics saw them as sort of dying. I like that. I'm always very drawn to just this kind of eye peeping out there.
Yeah.
And sort of, are things as they seem, I suppose. Alma Tadema had all the petals shipped over from the French Riviera at great expense.
Really?
I forget when he painted this, it was out of season.
Wow.
Yeah.
Amazing. Thank you. We've got a question here now. So when did flowers and scent lose their potency in paintings in the post-Victorian era?
I mean, my book goes up to 1914, just because I feel like the war was a kind of break point in so much of British art, but there's much more of a kind of focus on the machine age and the devastation of war on the landscape, for example, and less kind of interest in those kind of the Victorian language of flowers and things that started to seem very kind of old-fashioned, I suppose, in a time of war.
Thank you. Any other questions before we go? Okay, I can't see any more in there, but Christina, thank you so much. It's absolutely fascinating. Again, wonderful talk. And I really enjoyed hearing more, sort of in depth about many of those paintings. So just thank you everyone for coming along again today. Just to say that we've got a couple of more talks left in the series that we're very much looking forward to. So next week we've got Dr. Maddie Hewitson talking on Scent and Spirituality, Simeon Solomon's Sacred Sensory World. And then we've got a special announcement that we've got another talk that we've added to the series, and it's with Gregorio Sola-Valla and Antje Kewell, and it's going to be in October. And as you've all attended so far these talks, you can attend this extra one as part of the series. So we'll be sending out more details about that for you but it's going to be titled Discover the Heart and Soul of Pre-Raphaelite Scents. And we're really looking forward to hearing more from both of our new invited guest speakers. So thanks again, and we will be here this time next week for the next one.
Thank you.
Thanks, Christina. Goodbye.